First of all, it's a massive pleasure and privilege to be here at IIM Shillong. I thank you very much for inviting me to your campus and giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts and interact with you. I must admit that yesterday when I was doing this 8-hour trip from Chennai to Shillong, I was wondering whether this is going to be worth it. But just the stunning beauty of this place and the fact that I am amidst all these bright-eyed and high-energy individuals like yourselves more than makes up for that minor discomfort. So thank you very much for having me here and giving me this chance to interact with all of you. I'm hoping that our session will be very lively and interactive. I have a brief deck here, but that deck is more a prop to sequence my thoughts. I'm hoping that through the deck as well as through our presentation today, I will sort of provoke questions in your minds, arouse your curiosity, and through that we will be able to have a really lively session which will help you and also help me in the sense that when I go back, there must be suggestions and recommendations from your side which I can take to help Citibank perform even better. So that indeed is the agenda. I have half an hour to 40-minute deck, and broadly that covers 3 areas. In the first section, I'd like to give you a glimpse of trends in digital banking, focusing primarily on online and mobile banking and e-commerce, because these are indeed the hotspots of digital banking. In the second part, we will look at how Citi is looking at digital banking and how important digital banking is to Citi. We also touch upon some of the innovations that Citi has done in this space, and I'd like to understand what you think of it and how you can further improve that. And in the final section, which I'm hoping will be of interest to you, we'll look at other exciting things that we do at Citi apart from work and how that enthuses us, encourages us. We'll also have a quick look at professional life at Citi, and you will find that it will not be very dissimilar from life at a top-end campus like yourselves, where we pay a lot of attention on recruiting the right sort of people, making sure that they get the experience, the exposure, the learning while they are at Citi, and then a world of opportunities opens up, very much like your campus. So that indeed is, in a nutshell, what we have for the next half an hour or 40 minutes. Feel free to interrupt me as and when you have questions. Just put up your hand, and hopefully we will be able to look at those questions, maybe clarify some of those questions. But like I said earlier, some of those suggestions and questions that you throw up will provoke thoughts in our mind, and hopefully we'll be a better organization for it. Right? Does that sound all right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So let's start. Some helpers. Yeah. Right. If I see a queue like this in front of my bank, it only means one thing. Can you guys think what it would mean for us in this day and age? Bank is shutting down. Brilliant. So the last time I saw a queue like this was in London when this was a queue in front of Northern Rock that was about to shut down. But most of you may not have been born at that time. Maybe 20 years ago, this is the way customers used to bill up in front of banks to do their regular routine transaction. And routine transactions here is things like paying person to person, ordering a checkbook, paying a utility bill and stuff like that. So that was about 20 years ago. In 20 years now, you'll see that the devices mentioned below, these are the ways in which we interact with the bank. Just a quick question. When was the last time any of you visited a bank branch to do a routine transaction? How long ago was that? 2 years. Right. How many of you called a call center of the bank to do a transaction? Recently, the last 6 months? No one. How many of you only use online banking to interact with banks? That's it. So this is it. You guys are Generation Y. I'm not even Generation Y, and yet it's been 10 years since I visited a branch to do a routine transaction. As we go along in the presentation, you'll find that it's not just people like us, even ordinary sort of people who have other things to do in life, they have started to pick up digital banking. And as we go through some of the statistics, you will see that digital is very much center of plate. So it is not whether digital banking is required or not. It is what more can we do with digital banking is the thought that clients are having. These are all stuff. This is just to adding to the whole piece. The future of banking is digital. I mean, if you didn't know it, only if you'd like to tell us. Indians will outnumber Americans on the internet. What sort of internet penetration do we have in the country? 17 points. Somebody had points as well. What is it? 17 points? Yeah, about 18%. 180 million internet connections. How many smartphones? Sorry? 27 million. Which year? Sorry? 51 million. Which year? This year or last year? Right. It's about 118 million smartphones, expected to hit 500 million by 2017. So you can see that, especially given the rapid growth both in internet connectivity as well as devices that are becoming extremely low cost, smartphone penetration and internet penetration will change the whole way in which not just the way we do banking, but also the way we conduct our lives. PM pledges bank account for all Indians. I mean, there are numerous schemes that are being introduced right now. So you have financial inclusion, then you have this SDSS. So while it will take a long time to get every citizen in India having a bank account, the pace at which some of these activities are going on, and like I was telling Prachi while I was coming along, the stuff that RBI is doing, both in terms of creating guidelines for banking and for making sure that infrastructure is created for online is just tremendous. So while it is a massive and mammoth task to get every citizen to have a bank account, a lot of action will be in this space, and you will soon see that the growth in terms of bank accounts will just go through the roof. India, not China, holds key to smartphone growth. I mean, if we talked about it, we have 120 million smartphones today, expected to end this year by about 175 million. By 2017, we're talking about 500 million, which means 1 in 2. For every 2 citizens, 1 will have a smartphone. And they may not be the top-end iPhones, but they will definitely be functional smartphones that will work. Amazon India, Flipkart are betting on India, betting big on e-commerce in India. Would anybody know the size of the e-commerce market in India? Yeah?
Approximately $10 billion.
$10 billion. So yeah. Any other guess?
Approximately 14 billion.
14 billion. So you've done a lot of hard work. You can see you must have gone through some secondary research. You're absolutely bang on. 14 billion is the size of the e-commerce market, growing at about 30-35% year on year. And if you look at e-commerce market as such, it has 3 big components to it. The first and biggest by far is travel, which accounts for about 70% of e-commerce. And within travel, you can again break that down into 3 categories. The first being IRCTC, which by itself is a mammoth industry, so to call it, and 70% of 14 billion, 14 sevens are 98. So of the 9.8 billion, IRCTC will be 1/3. So roughly about 3 billion. 3 billion transactions, 3 billion worth transaction happen on IRCTC a year, and it's growing again. Then you have all these OTAs, the online travel agencies, your Make My Trips, Clear Trips, Yatra, Ibigo, all those guys, they make up the remaining 40-45% of travel. And then you have the big airlines, the Singapore Airlines, the British Airways and so on, which have direct connectivity and they make up the remaining. So the airlines industry itself is growing at about 20-25%, right? And then you have e-tailing, the Flipkarts, the Mantras, the Snapdeals, they make up about 17-18%, but the maximum action and growth happens in this sector. So you have investments going on in this sector, innovations happening in this sector, you have mergers and acquisitions going on here. So plenty of action. In fact, a lot of youngsters like yourselves, when they pass out, they shun big banks and they tend to start their own e-tailing outfits, hoping that they will get valuation or get bought over by some of these big guys. So massive amount of action happening in the e-commerce space. And we'll look at this a little more in detail. Tech experts believe that cash and credit cards may disappear by 2020. I'm not so sure about credit cards, but cash definitely will disappear or tend to disappear by 2020. Credit card may take a little bit longer. But this is, if you didn't know that digital is going to be the future, then all these guys are sort of pointing towards it. We don't need it. Sorry, this slide is a lot more boastful than I intended it to be. Right? We are doing very well digitally, and we have had external sort of recognition for it. But like I said, we don't want to sound as boastful. Citi has been rated as the best consumer internet bank for 6 years by Global Finance, and that is something that we're proud of, and we continue to work hard to make sure that our digital offering is best in class. As you go further in the presentation, in fact, give it right away, I'll tell you why Citi is digitally so savvy and what makes Citibank's digital offering that much more potent and being recognized by external agencies. If you look at some of the metrics here, there are 1 million customers who use internet banking on a monthly basis. These are 1 million unique customers who log into Citibank online. Right? If you take this as a proportion of our customer base, this will roughly be about 65% of our active customers use digital banking. So essentially, like all of us said, these are customers who hardly visit the branch, who call centers very infrequently, but their predominant platform for interacting with the bank is digital. That's about 1 million customers. And this is by far the highest ratio for any bank, foreign, private, government in the country. And we also stand out in APAC, in the Citi world in APAC. We are one of the leaders. India is one of the leaders in APAC. So there is a strong focus to make sure that digital is the preferred mode of contact for our customers. So all that they can do, we try and make sure that is offered on the digital platform and accept things which are extremely complex or high involvement. For example, investment advisory, mortgage advisory, where there is a face-to-face interaction required. We try and make sure that the digital offering is complete and comprehensive to satisfy all our customer needs. The other thing that we're quite pleased with is that of the 1 million customers who log in, almost 25%, 250,000 use mobile devices. And we think that with the rapid growth in mobile, especially smartphones that we talked about a little while earlier, this percentage will go even further. Soon, online banking will be synonymous with mobile banking. Right? And just a question to sort of get your feedback. Do you think we should do all that we did? Is online banking, is mobile banking, or will mobile banking be very different from online banking? And what should banks keep in mind when they offer mobile banking? Should we just replicate what is there on online banking and hope that customers will be happy? Or do you think there is something new and unique that needs to get built on mobile, and why? Yeah?
Hi, my name is Neeta. I think it has to be different. I don't think the same net banking should be replicated on mobiles, because another element that mobile phones have is that they are physically in your hand while you're traveling around. So maybe, like you were saying about death of credit cards, that's something we could look into as a mobile phone being a replacement for a credit card. So I think it would be a combination of those two rather than just a replication of net banking.
Yeah, yeah. So will it be all of online banking plus mobile, or will it be, or if you take a Venn diagram, will mobile banking sort of be a superset of online, or will it be a part of online but you make things for mobile?
It would be a part of online, but I don't see it being the entire part of online.
Right. Any other thoughts, guys? Anything else here? Yeah.
Good morning, sir. I'm Sunny Shekhar. I believe mobile banking will be the superset of internet banking.
Right.
Because the added advantage that we have is the security factor, which comes with the identification of the customer with the mobile banking. And mobile banking has a sort of ease at which customer can connect directly with the bank, which is not present in internet banking, where a lot of security protocols are there. So mobile banking will be the superset of internet banking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hello sir, my name is Rahul. I think mobile banking has an added advantage of the location of the user. So on the basis of the user's location, extra facilities could be provided to the customer. It may be in terms of offers near the close by restaurants, or maybe some advantage by use of location.
Brilliant.
So
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
Good morning, sir. I'm Vinay Jain. What I feel is, I read this article on mobile banking, and it said that there should also be this option where people who don't have internet on their phone, like SMS, people should also be able to access banking. Like they have this system by which people who don't have internet access in smaller towns and villages, those people can, with a not so smartphone, they can also use that. So that should also be a part of that, so that everybody gets into the banking system.
Right. Do you know what that mechanism is, what protocol is?
I don't remember the name.
Anybody remembers what that protocol is when you don't have internet access?
Forgot it.
Sorry?
Forgot it.
Forgotten. It is called USSD. Yeah, unstructured service layer something. Right? Essentially, it is a protocol. If you imagine, say, IVR on mobile, right? If you imagine how IVR works, and if you were to do that on mobile without the voice, so you'll have a menu option, and you'll say that look, on that menu option, if I want to make a person-to-person payment, I click on that, and then I make a person-to-person payment. So it is called USSD. Yeah, so you're right. So especially with financial inclusion and reaching out to remote locations where internet access may not be that easy or that easy to get, USSD could be an option. But for mainstream banks like us, where we already have 65% of our customers online and mobile, we think that the way to go for us would be to have mobile app-based banking, because that's where most of our customers are headed. Right, so all those things that you mentioned, right? In fact, all of you sort of hit the nail on the head. Mobile banking does not necessarily have to be the same as online banking. Although when banks started off with mobile banking, they made the mistake saying, whatever is there on online, let's just replicate this on mobile. And 2 points that you made, one here and there. One is that mobile is always available to you, so you always have mobile, and therefore transactions that lend themselves to that sort of activity. So person-to-person payment that you want to make today, right, or you quickly want to check your balances, you want a notification on mobile. So those are things that lend themselves to mobile banking. And also the point that you made about location, right? That is an area that a lot of investment, a lot of research is going on. How can I look at a person? For example, as a bank, I know who the person is. Now, if I find out where he is, then I can marry these two things and give him the sort of offer that he will never miss. So the ability to give an offer to the customer at the time that he wants and at the place that he wants. So this is where mobile banking is headed.
First of all, when you say that mobile banking plays a very important role when it comes to financial inclusion, so my question would be, first of all, how do you ensure the security of the people who will be involved in the process? Because they're not very much technology savvy, first of all, in India I'm talking about. And secondly, since they'll be dealing with a lot of people who, you'll be dealing with a lot of people who do not know much about mobile banking or technology. First of all, how the security part comes in. Secondly, mobile banking is not really taken off in India. So when you talk about replacement of credit cards through mobile, it came up with M-Pesa, but it did not really take off. So what do you think is the reason?
Yeah. That's a very good question. I'd like to break that into 2 or 3 halves. Right? The first one is that when you say security infrastructure in mobile banking, like I said a little while ago, RBI has been extraordinarily far-sighted and mature about guidelines that help security for online banking. So for example, when you start mobile banking, there is a threshold of the payments that you make. So they start with the lowest sort of payments, and you can make payments up to 10,000 rupees. Right? I don't think you need to be extraordinarily tech-savvy to do mobile banking. If you're familiar with the use of a gadget, mobile banking sort of comes with that as well. So all the security protocols, whether it's a USSD secure structure layer, or it is the ability to have authentication done on pay. For example, every time I set up a pay on mobile banking, there is an OTP that comes to me. So I can be authenticated saying I'm indeed the person who I'm claiming myself to be. Also, some banks have gone even the other extreme route, saying that you cannot set up a payee on mobile. All you can do is that once the payee has been set up through online banking, you can start interacting or transferring money through mobile. Right? So there are various security layers built in, and it's sort of a curve. Once people get familiar with mobile, all these things will be loosened up a little bit to make sure that customers are happy. Right? The second part you said is mobile banking hasn't taken off, and you gave the example of M-Pesa. Now, mobile banking has various aspects. The one that you talked about, M-Pesa, is transacting using mobile as a device. But mobile banking as such, and I mean mobile banking, the ability to log into your bank account, look at the transactions, do person-to-person, order for a checkbook, all those banking transactions you could do. But you're quite right in the sense that we don't have NFC right now, and NFC sort of died. You guys are familiar with NFC?
Yes.
Yeah. So NFC is not taken off in that manner, and therefore mobile as a device replacing credit cards, you can't see that in India today. But if you go to Singapore, and I'm sure many of you will go there, you will see that a lot of these cafes use mobile as a payment device, and that sort of spells the death of credit cards. But like I said, it's a while before that can happen in India, given that infrastructure needs to be set up for NFC, and NFC as such is very, very expensive to be set up, especially the merchant infrastructure to be created is quite expensive. But there will be other devices that will come in, and location-based services is something that is happening already. In fact, we tried out a pilot where we said that if a customer were passing by a particular mall, the ability to target that customer with the offer that he or she would like. For example, if they know that I'm interested in cricket, for example, is there a cricket-related offer that I can be given as I pass by Wankhede Stadium? Right, so things like that. I'm just giving a very crude example, but you get the point. If I know the person, if I know where he is, if I know what his likes and dislikes are, I could marry all this information and give him an offer. In fact, banks are going, not just banks, organizations are going even a step further. They're saying that if, for example, Sridhar Iyer starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, goes this route, goes to his office and reaches office by 8:45, along the way he passes through KFC and there's an IOC petrol pump. Now, can the IOC petrol pump be clever enough to say that I've passed 20 times already, on the 21st time I need to fill my fill my engine, fill my car with petrol? Can they automatically, proactively take my car and say, sir, don't worry, we will fill it up with petrol and take you out? So the ability to predict behavior based on your regular routine activities is the next level that banks are going to. So for example, if you look at your own lives, you will have a certain routine. Imagine the same places that you'll go through. If those guys there were clever enough, they could say, look, he's passing me by almost every day. I'm sure he needs something from my shop. If I proactively reach out to him and give him that, even before his asking, he would be a fantastic customer for me. So this is the way things are going to happen in the future. Right? 65% of active customers are on internet banking. We also look at internet as a massive online acquisition tool, both for acquiring new-to-bank customers as well as cross-selling and upselling to existing customers. And almost 30% of our acquisition or sales to both to new-to-bank as well as cross-sell on selected products happens online. So when we say selected products, we're talking about asset products like cards, loans, and liability products like current account, checking account. So those sort of things, almost 30%. This is a fantastic number. 10 years ago, people were wondering what you would do with the internet. Today we're saying that this is about 30% sales channel. So this has come a long, long way. And the next three parameters, mobile number penetration, email ID penetration, and these two numbers, mobile and email ID. Now these might seem, I don't know why is he mentioning this, but this is the backbone that helps us do our online and mobile banking. The more customers we have, whose mobile ID we have, and email ID we have, the ability to reach out to those customers through digital modes makes it very, very easy and simple for us. For example, if you have to deliver OTP to customers, unless we have 95% of our customers' mobile IDs, it's impossible for us to reach out to the customer via mobile. So these two things are really the backbone or the stepping stone on which we build our mobile and digital offering. Financial transactions happen online, 85% of financial transactions. Those that can happen online and offline, if you take that as a denominator, the numerator is the number of online transactions that happen. So online upon online plus offline is almost 85%. And while all this was about how much the bank is doing, also it also reflects on the nature of our customers. 75% of our customers access their financial statements online. So it's been a long, long time since we stopped sending physical statements to our customers. So most of our customers access financial statements online. 75%. We are working hard to migrate the remaining 25 also to digital modes. So no check, no cash. 75% of these customers either come on to Citibank online or use the payment gateway to make their payments for their credit card or personal option. Similarly, with bill payments, most 75% of our customers pay bills online. And then e-commerce, Citi is a massive, massive e-commerce player, one of the leaders in the e-commerce space. 1,000 crores a month, which is roughly about 25 to 27% of the market. And this is growing, like we said, e-commerce itself is growing at about 30%. So for us to remain ahead of the market, we need to do it at a lot higher than that. And through this route, we're doing almost about 1,000 crores, 35 to 37% over last year. But more importantly, e-commerce for us is a hoop. For example, when I open a payment gateway to a Flipkart, a lot of other things also open up for the bank. So a nodal bank account, the ability to do a commercial card with them, the ability to do a mergers and So using e-commerce as a hook, the whole plethora of banking services that open up for these top e-commerce merchants. And this is where the investment is. You must have read in the paper about the investments happening in Snapdeal and Flipkart. And if Citi has a relationship, then all that investments get routed through the bank. So e-commerce is a hook to create a much larger pan-franchise relationship with our customers. Right, so this is why digital is very important and how much digital is central plate for Citi. These are some quick pillars that we look at, and this is something that intuitively you all will know. Acquisition we talked about, online and mobile banking. Social media, personally in this presentation I don't have very much on social media, but we can chat if you have questions. It will be interesting to understand what is your perspective of social media and whether that matches with the way in which we look at social media and how we think social media will help us as an organization. Then we have e-commerce, which we touched upon, and we have digital payments again. Digital payments is again one of the best parts about India is digital payments, and I'll talk to you as to why it is so. Right? What is so unique and great about digital payments in India, and why I think some fantastic work is being done in the area. Right? So before you start yawning, I thought I'll have a question for you. Suppose you decide to send 1,000 rupees to a friend in a different city. How long will it take? Sorry? Sorry, couldn't hear. It'll take 1 day, but sorry. Sorry guys, I can't hear you. Same day. So if I send money 9 o'clock, it'll reach by 6 o'clock. Is that what you're saying? Within? It'll take 2 to 3 minutes. Yeah? Any other response?
So it will take 2 working days because I have to register my friend, then the next day I can send the money.
So you register your friend and only the next day you can send the money?
Yeah.
So it'll take 2 days?
Yeah, 24 hours will take to register.
Yeah.
And after register, the moment I will send the money, after within 2-3 minutes the money will send in.
Yeah? Any other thoughts?
Sir, if we send the money in the same bank, transfer the money, so it will be transferred same day. If it's not the working day, it will be transferred on the next day.
Yeah.
If it's on the other bank account, it will take 2 working days.
It'll take 2 working days for another bank account. Any other thoughts?
So some of the banks are also providing instant registration. So you can send money after 10 minutes.
After 10 minutes. Right. Any other thoughts? You want to change your mind? 2 minutes? Or? You said 2 minutes, right?
Yeah.
You want to change your mind?
So I have done that.
You've done that? Okay.
Excuse, my name is Ramakrishna Reddy, and using IMPS we can do instant transfer to any account.
Right. Using IMPS, we can do instant transfer to any. How many of you agree with it? Only half your batch agree with it. No, he's absolutely right. Using IMPS, you can do payments in less than 30 seconds. There's somebody who's there said that registration has to happen and that it will take 24 hours to register. You can register your friend on IMPS. You will get an OTP, and on the first day of registration, immediately, you can send up to 30,000 rupees to your friend. And that will get done real time, 24/7. Whether it's a weekday, it's a working day, it's a holiday, it's a religious holiday, whatever, it will get done. Now, this is by far the best infrastructure that is there, not just in India, but even in many parts of the developed world. US, for example, does not have 24/7 real-time person-to-person payment transfer. Right? So this is something that we should be really proud of. I've worked in the UK extensively. UK has just about launched person-to-person transfer, Ping It as they call it. That got launched about a year and a half ago. But IMPS through NPCI has been there for about 3 to 4 years. This again goes to show how much payment infrastructure has developed in India and how RBI has been at the forefront of making sure that secure and quick payments is something that they want to do, not just for financial inclusion, but even for normal transactions. So within 30 seconds, you can transfer money to your friend who has a bank account, another bank, 24/7 on holidays as well. Right? Obviously, there are limits to the amount that you can send. So you have a 2 lakh limit on IMPS, but 2 lakh would cover almost all your daily transaction needs. It's only one of those extreme cases, the outliers, where you'll have to send more than 2 lakh rupees. So this is something that we should all be proud of. I don't know how many of you knew this, but this is a great infrastructure to have. So knowing your bank account number, while if it is an official transaction, if I already registered you with a pay, it is great. But if I have to send you one-time money, right? If you say went out for dinner and you have to split the bill, and I have to send you one-time money, then I have to ask you for your bank account number, which you may or may not remember. So you then say, okay, fine, let me look it up and I'll come back to you. So what banks are looking at is there a way that with just by knowing what I know about you, which is that I know your mobile number, I know your email ID, is there a way in which I can do a person-to-person payments? How many of you have heard of POP money in the US? Right. So POP money is one such scheme, although it is not 24/7 in real time. The ability to send money in a secure manner, quickly, 24/7, real time, by just knowing what I know about you, without asking for more details about your bank account number, like pointed out, IFS code. Although IFS code is a lot simpler to know than bank account number. For example, if I know your bank, then I can, from a drop-down, select your IFS code. So this is what we guys are working on. Is there a way in which we can make payment, person-to-person payment, even simpler than what it is today? So, so this is what I thought. Like, if, for example, if we didn't know your bank account number or IFS code, is there a way based on what we know about you, can we make that even simpler? Right. So we will now look at, like I promised, we look at aspects of how are we doing for time. We still have half an hour to go, right? Okay. We look at three broad areas. I mean, I could spend the whole day talking about digital banking and various things that are going on, but we'll have to, given the interest of time, we'll keep it crisp. The landscape piece we've already gone through. 197 million went online last year. 2015 internet, the large number, and all that good things. Now let's look at the future. Will brick and mortar bank branch continue to exist? What do you think? Will it exist? It will. Will it be in the same form that it is today? Will it do the same sort of functions that it does today? Will it change? If it changes, what will change? Yeah.
Very good morning, sir. My name is Harsh Dalmia. I think one of the changes that would come is more banks would have e-portal in the kiosk type of things which are available in some of the state banks which I have personally seen. So there would be more centers so that people who are not able to access internet, maybe in some remote places, even they can do it through internet and no human is required for the interaction.
Yeah.
They can directly do it for themselves.
Right. So you're saying kiosks will talk about branches will be there or they will disappear?
So branches would be there for the high-end transactions which are needed to be there, which are needed to be very secure.
Right.
And when we need to do cash deposits and cash withdrawal,
Yeah.
those things, in cases in transactions in which we are not able to do it online or through mobile banking, I think that would be still needed in some of the cases.
Branches will be needed, but they will not do routine recurring transactions. They will
Yeah.
do high-end transactions.
Exactly.
When you say high-end transactions, for example, if I have say $1 million to invest, so you think I will come to the branch and invest?
So, but if you have it in cash,
Yeah.
then you would have to come to the bank for at least depositing in the first place, and then you can do it online maybe.
Right. Any other thoughts of what will happen to branches? Yeah.
Morning, sir. I think branches will continue to exist,
Yeah.
but the number of branches will decrease as most of the banks would turn to white label banks. Means there would be merger in the recent Nachiket Moore committee. It was as it was for the white label, and the salespersons and white label ATMs. According to me, they would be similar for the white label banks also.
Right. So you'll have banks outsourcing their stuff and creating white label branches.
Yeah.
Right. Any other?
So I read recently that about 2 months back that SBI had opened some touch banking branches in malls in certain cities. I mean, they've also opened branches there, but branches there act as more like customer care centers. It's more like if someone has a problem in opening an instant account or something, they're just helping out with that. But they're not actively performing the roles which they actually perform in brick and mortar.
Yeah.
The other thing is branches could act as marketing sort of agencies.
Yeah.
Like they popularize the brand, and if it's created some mall or something,
Yeah.
it attracts the youth towards it.
Yeah.
Instead of having completely mobile based, it's harder to attract customers.
Right. I don't know the answer, so we can just conjecture as to how the future. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I think banks will be less dependent on actual physical presence of employees. I think that will happen at the branches. Even now you're seeing it. Even now you're seeing that you have a lot fewer staff in each branch. You have your online things, you have your smart boards at the venue, so you just have to touch what you want and get it done. You have only 3 maybe stalls open as opposed to 9 that were open before.
Yeah.
So I think that would happen with branches.
Right.
Maybe fewer people there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I believe that like in the air industry, the infrastructure on all the airports is shared. So that because the number of branches that will be required by every bank will go down. So that infrastructure, the brick and mortar model would be shared by all the banks.
Yeah. I hope that happens. Yeah. I'm not quite sure what will happen. If you look at, if you read up on various research reports like the McKinsey's and the Bains and all that, they will say that the branches will continue to exist, although they will do a different job. And I think one of you alluded to that, saying they will look at advisory, high-end advisory, high-end investment-based interactions with customers and so on. But the question is that if I'm a high net worth customer, say if I have $1 million with me, now it's very unlikely that I'll come out of the branch and say, look, I have $1 million, where can I invest? I will have the bank reps coming to my house or my office or wherever and doing the transaction. So while there is some merit in saying that branches will do different activities compared to what they're doing now, whether they'll necessarily do those high-end investment opportunities, high-end mortgage sales and those sort of things, I'm not that sure. So they will definitely not do routine recurring transactions. So it will be very unlikely for branches to come and say, okay, do you want a checkbook? Here is a checkbook. Do you want to do a person-to-person payment? This is the way this teller will take care of that. So those sort of things they will not do. But what will they do then is something they will let vary. Just to touch upon that experience of opening up a branch at a mall. City also has done that. We have a branch at Palladium Mall. I don't know how many of you are from Bombay, but if you are from Bombay, you know that Palladium is one of the more sort of upscale malls in Bombay. Our experience has been mixed, in the sense that when we launched it, we thought it will be a massive coup, it will be a marketing coup as well, and that we will have customers walking in and doing it. Our initial response wasn't that great, but then we figured out ways in which to make that mall attractive. So for example, we tell customers that come and apply for a credit card, and if you have your documents ready, you can go watch a movie in the mall, and you come back, the card will be ready for you. So, and also all these small gimmicks about saying free parking if you walk into the branch and those sort of things has helped us get the right sort of traffic into the branch. And then once the traffic comes into the branch, you can then have your best salespeople to try and convert that traffic into customers. But it isn't as we expected. We thought that as soon as we have a mall, a branch in the mall, there will be customers coming in, all the high net worth guys will come in and open bank accounts and those sort of things. But it hasn't quite panned out that way, although we found other ways to make use of it. The other big thing about having a branch in the mall is that the sheer space that you get, that in itself is a massive marketing opportunity. So the mall has, I don't know how many million footfalls, but all those guys see it and they get familiar with the brand, and if they're interested, they interact with the brand as well. So there's a marketing element to it. If you said that to put up a hoarding at, say, wherever the mall is, right, it cost us so many millions to produce, then we have a branch already there, so that does the work of hoarding as well. So in many ways, there's a marketing angle to it, which also helps create that. So branches will be there, their function will differ. What they will do, the jury's still out on it, but if you go by some of the research reports, it talks about high-end investments. I'm not that sure about it. Video banking, now this is something that's already happening. How many of you have experienced this? For example, most of our RMs talk to their customers on video banking. So we have a link where the customer just much like FaceTime, the customer just logs in, and then the ability to interact with the RM. We also are working on programs where once you log into Citibank Online, if you have a particular profile, then you can do a video chat with your RM while you're logging in. And that again is not for routine transactions. For example, when I send money to my friend for 5,000 rupees, I'm not going to call my RM. If I have $1 million they want to invest, then I can talk to my RM, fix a time, ask his advice. Or if I want, even if I didn't have that sort of money, just maybe 25, 30,000 rupees I want to put in a mutual fund, I can get my RM's advice right on Citibank online through a video chat. So this will definitely change the way in which we bank. Aadhaar-based eKYC, I think this again is a fantastic opportunity. There are 2 or 3 views on Aadhaar. One, that it is great and this is the way we need to have an identity. Second, that the entire Aadhaar process itself is not that robust. So the way the guide took in your details, can you rely on that sort of process to issue a bank account? That's the second school of thought. The third school of thought is that Aadhaar is there, but it won't be there in the future and so on. But having said all that, if you look at the sheer number of Aadhaar, right, almost half, or more than half, almost 650 million Aadhaar accounts, right? And if you look at metros and cities like Bombay, Chennai and all that, the penetration there is a lot higher. So Aadhaar is an infrastructure that is created. Now we can argue about whether it is robust enough and it is good enough to open a bank account. But given that RBI has mandated that you can open bank account using Aadhaar, the ability to just link up with the Aadhaar database and download the KYC documents of customers takes away the entire hassle of asking the customer to bring his proof of address, proof of identity and so on. So this is a massive opportunity again. And a lot of banks, including Citi, are working on this to make sure that the entire account opening process is simple and easy. So I don't know how many of you opened an account recently. How long did it take you? Yeah, how long did it take?
It took me about an hour and a half.
With all the documentation? No, but by the time the guy started the application form, by the time you had all the documents filled in, the process itself would have taken you an hour and a half. But the entire, from the time it began to the time you got your bank account, how long did that take?
It took that long.
It must be your campus branch, right?
Huh?
Was it your campus branch or something?
No, it wasn't a campus branch, it was an SBI branch in Chennai.
Yeah.
But because I had somebody else who had the account, the process became easier.
Yeah. Our experience has been that from the time you start interacting with the customer to the time the bank account is actually opened. And this is not a reflection of the banking process itself, but the fact that customers have other things to do than to worry about their KYC document, proof of address. So he comes and says, okay, come tomorrow, come day after, I'm not here, I'm going on holiday or whatever. The average time it takes about 7 to 8 days from the time you touch the customer first to the time the bank account is actually opened. So with eKYC, the ability to download the documentation, a lot of that will get compressed. That will help. Artificial intelligence investments, a bit far-sighted. I mean, this is a bit in the future, but if you look at, if you're following the mutual fund industry, then there's a lot of focus on reducing fee to investment for advisory. So a lot of self-select advisory will happen, and this is where artificial intelligence, analytics-based, analytics-driven mutual fund options or selecting investment options will come about. A bit in the future of this one, but it's not that far away. Within another 3 to 5 years' time, you'll have a lot of these savvy, internet-savvy, financially savvy investors doing it through self-select platforms, and they would have done their research either by themselves, or they would have spoken to their friends and family, or they would have read up, and they will make their own investment choices. So you wouldn't need to have an advisor coming and saying, put it in DSP, BlackRock, or whatever. I'll just skip the landscape and Citi's presence and come back to the future. This is a massive, massive opportunity. And the sort of work that's going on here is just amazing. The ability to do mobile banking through WhatsApp, the ability to do USSD-based, we touched upon that, USSD-based banking, right? Physical credit cards, we again touched upon that. There is, I mean, when you come into industry, you realize that a lot of these brilliant ideas come from vendors. And it's not just the bankers who sit and think of these ideas. A lot of these small-time vendors, a lot of these IIT grads, we have a small cell of IIT grad students who we just tell them go and just play around and come back and tell us what is it that you found. And that's how we found that we can use WhatsApp to send text alerts. Right? And obviously there is some security protocol that we have to do. But imagine sending text alerts to WhatsApp. Apart from the pull feature, customers don't have to pay for that text that they get, especially to pull. Right? Can we extend that into WhatsApp banking? So there is a lot of energy, enthusiasm, excitement in this area, and if that excites you, then you must definitely pursue that as a career, because there is tremendous amount of action. Apart from that, there's a lot of VC investment as well. So all those guys who want to be overnight millionaires, billionaires, so this is an area for you guys to look at seriously. E-commerce, I mean, this again, if you look at e-commerce, we talked about 14 billion, right? What percentage of that is the total retail spend? You think e-commerce would be what percentage of retail spend in India? Yeah?
0.2%.
0.2%, brilliant. Any other thought? It is 0.2%. So we talk so much about e-commerce growth and how e-commerce is growing and so on and so forth, and yet it is only 0.2%. So imagine if this became critical mass, right? And it will become critical mass. So this is again an area, no wonder all these VCs and all the big guys are investing in this. There will be mergers and acquisitions, there will be consolidation of players, but e-commerce is just bound to stay. Right? If you look at some of these developed, and you can take a cue from these developed markets, right? If you look at Sainsbury, for example, in the UK, almost 50% of their sale is online, and they have a massive physical distribution. In fact, Sainsbury is like a State Bank of India. Almost every street corner you'll have a Sainsbury outlet, and yet almost 50% of their sale is online. Similarly, with all these Marks and Spencers, all these big brands, dominant amount of sale comes from online. And in India, we're just talking about just 0.2%. Even for the biggest of offline stores, the sale online is just very, very small. So all we're waiting for is that huge uplift where the internet penetration goes up, the smartphone penetration goes up, but these two things will just completely explode the e-commerce market. So it's an area to watch out for, an area to keep an eye on and see how we can participate from a bank's perspective. But also from people like you who are starting their careers, keep a watch on that. And if you think of some clever ideas on how you can help e-commerce, then you should sort of pursue it with passion and see where that takes you. Yeah. Any thoughts, questions on e-commerce? Anybody has a account of use? Any e-commerce not that great yet?
So e-commerce players looking at the Indian mindset are trying to, pitch in. Are trying to pitch in the cash on delivery option. So how are banks looking at it?
It's a great point. It's a great point. 50% of, we look at e-commerce market, we said 70% is travel, 15% is retailing. Of that 15% retailing, almost 50% is cash on delivery. So customers actually would like to buy something and pay for it by cash. Now why do you think it happens in India? It is a very uniquely India phenomenon. Yeah, go on. Sorry, you haven't spoken, so what do you say?
My name is Padash. I think it's because Indians we like to check the product first, and then we like to pay for it. So first we like to check the product and be sure that the product is fine.
And others would like to do that?
Because in India the thing is we are very risk averse people, so we do not want to take any risk for it.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Good morning, sir. I'm Tejasvi Kumar. Some of the people are scared that their site or something, they might store their card number or something related to it.
Brilliant. Yeah. Any other reason? Yeah.
There is somewhat cash involved to it, like if you are earning cash, means you're earning in cash, you like to spend in cash.
Brilliant.
Because that is one major thing involved in Indian scenario, because major of the businessmen earns in cash and they like to spend in cash, not go in banking.
Excellent. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Siddharth. Maybe most of the people in the second tier cities and towns, they would have credit cards and debit cards.
Yeah.
So they would like to pay by using
cash.
Right.
All those. Yeah. Sorry. One last one. Yeah.
I think another unique thing in India is the fact that at home, like if you say you want a delivery, you always have somebody at home to receive the delivery and pay the cash.
Yeah.
Whereas that might not be the same in other countries.
Right. Yeah, possibly. All the reasons that you mentioned, plus one more. I found this by accident. Yeah, sorry, one last one, please.
Black money can also be.
Which is what he said somewhat. He said it slightly more in a polished manner, but yeah. Yeah. One last reason I found out, and I found out by accident when I spoke to someone, is why is it that you do cash on delivery? He said it's a fantastic way for me to try out products. So what I do is I order 6 pairs of shoes, and when they come, I try out each of these pairs. Whichever I like, I take, the very send back. So that was another unique application of cash on delivery which I hadn't thought of. So for all those good reasons that they do it. Also that when e-commerce sites started off, they had cash on delivery as a very prominent option. If you go to some of these international e-commerce sites, you will not find cash on delivery displayed at all, if at all. So the way e-commerce has evolved in India is that cash on delivery is being very much a part of the initial offering, and people have gotten used to it. Now, how are banks tackling that? 3 or 4 ways in which they're doing it. One, we have the mobile POS. So as the guy delivers the goods, he also has the mobile POS where he can swipe the card. We're trying to see if we can develop an app around it. So instead of having to carry that bulky piece of gadget, is there an app that we can do as part of the system and then get the customer to input his ID? So that is the second. The piece about India being a cash-rich economy, you can do little to do that, but we'll see how that goes. Penetration of credit cards and debit cards is a big issue. How many credit cards do you think there is in India? 20 million. Only 20 million credit cards in India. And there are about 300 million debit cards, so banking account equipped. So debit card penetration is a lot higher, credit card penetration is a lot lower. Again, restricted to the top 15 to 20 cities in India. So the tier 2, tier 3 cities, penetration levels of credit cards will be quite low. But unless we have a robust credit bureau which can help us understand profiles of customers in tier 2, tier 3 cities, that penetration will take a little bit longer to grow. So we are saddled with that. But cash on delivery is a massive issue, not just for banks, but even for merchants, for example. While they have promoted this very actively, cash comes with its own problems. The ability to handle cash, theft, the entire process of handling cash itself. So it is cumbersome both for merchants as well as for banks. Right, I think we're running out of time. I'll quickly go through some of these innovations we've done. We talked about 24/7. We looked at it 60 seconds. There's a boy helps at 60 seconds, right? And that's the way it is. Utility bills online. How many of you have, when is the last time you stood in a queue for a utility bill? Do your parents stand in a queue for a utility bill? No. What do? They have somebody pay.
Yes.
Online. Yeah. Now we have the new initiative, the BPSS, or the Bharat Bill Payment System, which the government has mooted. That again is a fantastic initiative. I don't know how quickly it will happen and how well it will be implemented, but as a concept is great. It's like that we will have a single platform where utilities across sectors, whether it's education or electricity or your taxes, we will have a single platform with the ability for customers to pay it. Now you would nitpick and argue saying when will that happen, how will that happen, what will you charge and so on. But for a government to think in this manner in itself is a big thing. And I'm sure the way they've implemented some of these other initiatives, it will not be that far away before we start doing it. Obviously it will come with teething problems and obviously there will be some hiccups here and there. But the very fact that we can have a unified platform like this is big, is very big. And that will change the way in which we start paying our bills. Virtual assistant, and this is something that came up through, like I said, we have this small set of customers, small set of IIT grads, and this is how this came about, right? We looked at our city phone calls and we found that a lot of our customers call city phone for some routine recurring transactions, which they could have eased. Some of them are transactions, some of them are queries. For example, where is your nearest ATM? I live in say Chennai, where is the nearest ATM? Now you don't need to call city phone to find out where the nearest ATM is. So if customers were offered an option to actually select, they would have done this themselves. So that is how we have. So what it does really is it's still in a very rudimentary form. Obviously we'll build on it and make it a lot more intelligent than what it is. But what it does is that it has a list of answer bank. So it has a bank which is about 1,500 answers ready for it. And based on what the customer types, the tool sort of uses its intelligence to figure out what the question is and throws up the appropriate answer to that question. And the customer then has the ability to rate that answer, saying, look, this answer was great, it satisfied my query, or that the answer was terrible, it is quite a useless answer. So based on that, we keep refining it and saying, these questions have the right answers, and these are some of the other questions we need to refine the answers. And we've done this over the past 8 months now, and we find that almost 40% of our customers are happy with the responses that they get from the virtual assistant. And this has helped us decrease our call volumes, it has helped us decrease our mail volumes or the hard copies that we send out to customers. And what we tend to do with this now is to make sure that we now put this within the secure area when the customer logs in, so that we can actually advise them on transactions, saying, look, you have lazy money lying in your bank account, would you like to invest? right? So for example, a lot of people have, I'm sure when you grow up, you will have a few lakhs lying in your savings bank account. While it is great for the bank, it is not, the money is not being put to use as far as you're concerned. It's the way in which the virtual system can suggest options for you to do it. SMS to card and this and these two things I'll quickly just run past you. What we're saying is that we already know enough about our customers, right? For example, if I have an existing customer with a personal loan account, I know all about that customer. I know his brand, date of birth, name, address, etc., etc. Now, why is it that I need to ask him to fill up a form again? All I need is a text message from him saying, personal loan at this sort of parameters. Are you happy for you to take? Are you happy to take it? If he says yes, then we go ahead, take the data from the bank and book a personal loan. So it's simple and easy for customers. Obviously, there are security angles, and I won't bother you with details of how we manage the security piece. But the ability to just get the customer to give us incremental information fully about the product that he's going for, the remaining we already have, we just need to authenticate it with the customer one time, and then the entire process of application is simple and easy for customers. Right? Similarly with EMI, for example, if I bought something worth say 10,000 rupees and I would like to split that into EMI, now I should have the option of doing it when I buy it. Right? I can't go back 3 months later and say, oh, 10,000 rupees EMI, can I convert it? So the ability to convert a high value purchase into an EMI, or when I look at my bill and it says, oh my god, this month I have to pay a lakh of rupees as my card outstanding, is there a way some portion of this bill I can convert it to EMI? So doing it at that time. So most importantly, the ability to do a transaction when the customer wants it, not when the bank wants it. When the customer wants it, at the place the customer wants it. These are two things that help us get here. Right. I'm running out of time, so I'll quickly skip these two things. We've sort of touched upon it. I'll come to a slightly more interesting aspect, which hopefully you will appreciate. You would have heard a lot of stories about Citi, how Citi logs out its MAs, they work late hours, there is ruthlessness, Citi is extremely mean and lean, and so on and so forth. All those stories that you heard are true, right? But what is also true is that we have fun apart from doing the regular stuff. So I have here some glimpses of the sort of fun we have. If you look at the pictures below, the two pictures where you have a group of guys standing in that great looking resort, not as beautiful as Shillong, but yeah, a great looking resort. This is an offsite that my team had, and it's just not my team, it's every unit in the bank has a bonding exercise that we go on a yearly basis. So it is a very informal 2 to 3 day affair where you have fun, there are some very informal presentations, but there's a lot of idea generation that happens during informal chats. So all these games that we play, and at the end of those 2-3 days, one, we are more tightly knit team, but also some of these suggestions and ideas that you say as a part of your further conversation sometimes have a lot more impact than in a formal presentation that you do. So it has worked really well for us. And on the right hand side corner, you can see a group of Citi bankers on their way to do financial literacy program for the remote villages. So that again is very much a part of the Citi culture. Then again, you have Citi challenges. So you have the Digital Star of the Year. And again, I picked an example from my team. So the Digital Star of the Year is a guy who has met all his goals for the year. But in addition, he's shown the ability to innovate, not just pie in the sky sort of ideas, like you can do that, you can do this, but an idea that looks at the constraints of the bank and he takes it through, links up with stakeholders, make sure that this idea takes the path of implementation, there's some tangible progress in those ideas. It is judged by a jury which is non-EBIS, so my peers in other parts of the bank, for example, on the investment side, on the card side, they judge the person. But what comes with this the Digital Star of the Year is a lot. So this person automatically is rated in the top 5% of the bank. His profile is highlighted to not just seniors within India, but internationally. So people will recognize him and know him. It comes with a hefty cash bonus as well, and all the good things that go with the Digital Star of the Year. So it is a program that we launched 2 years ago. A lot of enthusiasm and excitement around it. And we had a lot of bright MAs, including Kailash Madan, who appreciated this program. So it's something that is worked out really well for us. So the point I wanted to make is a lot of good things happen, a lot of exciting things that happen apart from the hard work. And that keeps both us motivated as a team, but also it helps the bank, given that a lot of new things come out of it. Right. This is the last section and the last slide actually that I have. And what I want to leave you with the thought is that professional life at City is not very different from the life that you have here in the campus. Right? So when you come into campus, you come through a rigorous CAT examination, then you have a GT and an interview, and then they handpick the best guys and then they put them into this program, the PGP program. As you all come through it, you know that. We do something very similar in City. So getting into City, like some people say, right, getting into PGP is a lot tougher than getting out of it. Once you get in, you come out automatically, unless you really sort of take it that easy. Similarly, in City, it's quite difficult to get in. And we have a rigorous process through campus placement, through peers discussions and all that. But once you get in, the sort of training and exposure that you get is just phenomenal. And I'm a living example of that. I've been in City for 18 years. Right? I joined City 1 year out of campus, 1.5 years out of campus in '96. And I've been with City all along, except for a brief stint in Lloyd's in London. So the opportunities that it throws up, I can't think of any other bank or any other organization who have thrown up. First of all, given the training that I had, when I joined the bank in '96, I was just 2 years out of campus. My boss went on a training program to Harvard for 6 months. So I was my boss for 6 months. And the sort of exposure that I had, and it was not all straightforward and simple, and I went through some really terrible times and was wondering what is it that I did to go through this. At the end of 6 months, I was a lot better professional than I was when I joined them. The ability to withstand pressure, the ability to present to people who are far senior than me. So first time I fumbled and I made mistakes. But as I did it 2 or 3 times, the sort of confidence that I got with this whole process was phenomenal. The bank has this sort of appetite and this sort of focus or this sort of ability to let people loose. And they make a judgment about the guy and say, look, this guy looks all right, let's let him loose, let's see what he's made of. And that sort of exposure and that sort of experience is invaluable. So the ability to give that sort of exposure, that sort of experience, plus that you interact with so many high quality people. Not just within India, you have these regional calls, you have these global calls, and you're limited you're just limited by your ambition. If you want to work for a global program, all you need to do is put up your hand. Obviously, you have to be good at it, and that we take care when we recruit the people. So you put up your hand, you work hard at it, and it is not participation for participation's sake. It's not that, okay, I'm also there, I'm also there. For example, you must have realized in your own project where if you have a team of 8 people, there are 2 engines and many passengers. So it's quite easy for us to figure out who the engines are and who the passengers are. So you have to be an engine, you have to put up your hand, you have to slog it out, but the ability to do good work and to be seen as doing good work, both are important. Right? People normally tend to err on one or the other. So you have people who are very quiet, stay in the background, do all the hard work, and keep quiet about it, which in some ways is something that people appreciate, although I am not a big fan of that. If you're doing good work, then you have to be seen to be doing good work as well. The other extreme is also not that great in the sense that I just keep talking about how great I am without doing very much. Right? So, but this balance between doing extraordinarily well and being seen as doing well, the ability to present yourself as a man of confidence, somebody who's done well, who's happy to do well, who's happy to take on this assignment. So that culture is very much a part of the City DNA, and you just realize that only when you come out. And when you come out again, opportunities just get thrown up. Like you have campus placements here, day 1, day 0, whatever. Similarly, you have opportunities to work in City. For example, at the end of 3 years of my stint, I was posted in the UK, and I did that for 10 years. I can barely think of any other organization, let alone banks, that will throw a guy who's done 4 years into a real plum job in the UK. And I'm not an exception. I'm more a rule than an exception. So these are the sort of things that we do and make sure that the career growth is taken care of. It comes with its pressures, it comes with all the mean things that we talked about. But overall, it's a great place. So that's all I had. Any questions, any thoughts, any suggestions? Yeah.
So the various online initiatives, for instance, the virtual currency in the form of Bitcoin, or the financial services offered by the mobile operators in Africa, or the e-retailers in China, for instance, are these things a challenge for the traditional banking industries, because these still they know far more about the customers, and these are basically technology firms. So is it a challenge or a threat to the current banking industry?
Yeah. Before I answer that question, what do you think?
I think it's banks do need to take into consideration these factors, because, for instance, if let's say a online retailer, e-retailer decide to get into the financial services, or if the norms change, because governments too are focusing on the financial inclusion, as in the Nachiket Moo's report. So it may so happen that banks may face all of the sudden.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I sort of tend to agree with you. Although the RBI has been very clear that anything to do with banking, right, it will be the banks, the ability to underwrite a customer and to make sure that the customer is good enough or is credible enough to be given a loan, rests with the bank. So even if I use a customer, for example, if you take just the case of, say, one of the biggest mobile operators in India, even if that person had the widest reach, he cannot do banking transactions without aligning the bank. We'll see, for example, the payment banks, the lending cannot be done by them. They have to actually cooperate with the mainstream bank to do the lending activities. Right? So RBI, unlike in M-Pesa, where, for example, the operators themselves could act like a bank, in India it is very clear that banking has to be done by banks. Right? And now you have the Nachiket More committee which talks about payment banks, where the liability piece of the account can be done by other guys who are payment banks. But the asset piece, where lending comes in, has again to be done by the mainstream banks. Bitcoin, the jury's still not out on Bitcoin. For example, Bitcoin is not recognized by any of the regulators, definitely not in India, but even worldwide, it is not a recognized currency. It is based on supply and demand, right? You don't know how this entire logic works. So you could be lucky enough, or you could luck it and make money on Bitcoin, or you could lose money on Bitcoin as well. So it is extraordinarily volatile as a currency for it to become mainstream. Whether banks will take a very emancipated view of it and they will say, okay, fine, this is the way the future will be, we'll have to wait and see. But none of the regulators have recognized Bitcoin as an official currency, mainly because of its volatility and the fact that you don't know how this whole mechanism works. For example, who's to say that tomorrow they'll say, again, fine, Bitcoin port is opened up again, we start manufacturing Bitcoins again. So there is no regulation on Bitcoin. So these are two things that currently are a handicap for Bitcoin and currency like those Bitcoin. But in the future, who knows? They could become. Any other thoughts, guys? Any other parting thoughts? Yeah?
So I was thinking about the utility bills. Like no one has to go now. But still, the gas agencies like Indian and Bharati Petroleum, they come, they take cash, but still the process is cumbersome. So that is an area that the banks can look at, and growth can be massive.
Yeah. No, certainly, there's the other things as well. For example, if you look at a person's monthly spend, right? Banks are focused very, very acutely on things like entertainment and travel and so on. So when you go to a restaurant, you can pay by card. When you travel, you can pay by card. But how many times do you travel in a month on a regular basis? Very few times. Most of your monthly expenses are recurring in nature. So you buy grocery, you do rent, you pay for school fees and so on. Where credit card usage, by definition, is not that high. For example, I can't see many parents paying that child's school fee on a credit card. Or it's happening these days, but if you look at, say, grocery purchase, it's very fragmented. You tend to go to a mom and pop shop and pay by cash. With Nilgiris and Reliance Fashion, those sort of things coming up, the acceptance of cards has gone up. But the proportion of cards in those sort of recurring daily spend is pretty low. And that's an area that really we're focused on, especially grocery, education, and some utilities that we talked about. Yeah?
So the city has been targeting only the affluent customers majorly. So as we move towards digitalization, city could be missing on a major chunk of the population.
Yeah.
So will that be a bad thing for city?
I'm not so sure, because if you look at the trends in the world, there are three trends, right? There is globalization, there is urbanization, and there is digitalization. Right? If you look at the 15 markets a city is, if you take the contribution of those 15 markets to GDP, it will be completely disproportionate. These 15 markets would, my guess would be 70-80% of GDP because maybe not that high, but at least 60-70%. So there is enough market in those 15-16 cities itself. So I don't think those markets are saturated. I don't think those markets are penetrated enough. So there is enough opportunity for a bank like Citi to go in there. Obviously, there are constraints that the bank like Citi has in terms of branch licenses and so on. So given those constraints, it is better for us to focus deep into a segment rather than spread ourselves thin and say we'll be everywhere. Digital will help. Even within those 15 cities, our digital offering will be a center of play, because that is how we will reach out to those customers. Because even 42 branches is not enough for 15 cities. That's all we have. So even if we concentrate ourselves to these 15 cities, digital will be the key role.